Welcome back, Left Reckoners. Well, is it Bolsonaro? We're joined by our good friend and buddy, Brian Muir. Brian, thank you so much for coming back on Left Reckoning.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun coming on here and talking with you, Dave.
I mean, this is an interesting one. Why don't you tell us this big news that we've got regarding Bolsonaro, but also a lot of his cronies?
Well, this has been going on since April 2023, when the Parliament opened an investigation into what they were saying was at the time a military coup attempt, which failed on January 8th, 2023. They spent months investigating. They produced a 3,000-page document full of material evidence, screenshots, emails, screenshots from WhatsApp chats, emails, witnesses, Bolsonaro's aide-de-camp, or like personal attaché, Lieutenant Colonel Mauro Cid, turned state's evidence. And that ended with a recommendation for indictment of 33 people. So then the next step was the federal police, based on the recommendations from the Parliament. They opened their investigation. They spent over a year investigating, and they came up with a 1,000-page final report, focusing more on what they felt was like the most important evidence. During that time, they found more and more evidence. They conducted a series of raids with search warrants and found, for example, that Mauro Cid had deleted all of his emails, but he hadn't emptied his trash folder when they seized his personal computer. And there was a lot of damning evidence in there. And then they found a handwritten notebook by General Augusto Heleno, one of the other indicted figures, who's a really nefarious figure in Brazilian history. He goes back to the military dictatorship, and he was also the commander of MINUSTA's military operations during the Cid Soleil massacre in 2004 in Port-au-Prince. He had kept like a spiral notebook with his notes about all the plans for the coup that they found when they went into his place, because he's like 77 years old or something. He was old school. He had it all written down on notes. And then, so they produced their report recommending the Attorney General's office to indict. The Attorney General's office then opened its own investigation based on the previous two investigations. And I think it was the beginning of March, the end of February of this year, it produced a 272-page final document formally indicting Bolsonaro and 31 of his cronies. One person was taken out of the investigation due to analysis by the Attorney General that there wasn't enough material evidence, just hearsay. Okay? So these people were broken up into 4 groups, I believe. And the first group to go on trial in the Supreme Court was the group that's called the nucleus of the coup. These are the 8 people who led the coup d'etat plan. And so this wasn't just like Donald Trump telling his followers to run to the Capitol or something. This started in 2021 after an investigation was opened up into death threats against members of the Supreme Court and whatnot. They started getting worried about losing the elections. And so they developed this plan to use with business elites and whatever, to use social media to help develop a narrative that the electronic voting system was flawed. The same system that Bolsonaro did not complain about after he was elected president, right? That it was flawed, and that they were the communists were going to steal the elections, okay, by hacking into the voter system, the electronic vote system. Now, this is a system that's been in place since 1996. It's very efficient. It's won praise around the world. It's been copied in other countries. And there's never been any documented case of hacking into its system because all of the ballot boxes are separate from each other. They don't link together. So the absolute worst that someone could do is perhaps, it's never been done before, but maybe hack one ballot box. It's impossible for a hacker to go into the entire ballot system. So during the lead up to the election, Bolsonaro then held a 1-hour press conference broadcast abusing his power and harnessing the state television network to broadcast live a 1-hour speech in which 100 foreign diplomats were present in the presidential palace, in which he made a series of accusations against vulnerability in the voting system and claiming that if he lost the election, it was because there was fraud without providing any proof. That's the moment, based on that one event, the electoral court afterwards, after the elections, declared Bolsonaro ineligible for 8 years for running for office. So that happened immediately after he left office. During that period between when the election took place and when he resigned 2 days early and fled to Florida, there was a series of meetings with high-ranking, the commander of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, in which Bolsonaro and his vice presidential candidate, who was former defense minister, General Walter Braga Neto, asked them to get on board with an auto coup to keep Lula from taking power. We now know that, and they also reached out, we know from journalism and stuff, that they reached out to the US and Russia to see if they could get help for that. And both countries declined at the time. But we know now that the commander of the Army refused to get on board, and the Army is like twice as big as the Air Force and the Navy combined. But the Navy commander agreed to go along with the coup. So he's one of the defendants that was just sentenced along with Bolsonaro, right? So that led to the 8th of January. Do you got a question first? I mean, it's such a long story.
No. I mean, yeah. I mean, I just want to kind of make it explicitly clear as we get into some of the more recent events that, like, I mean, this is a full on coup attempt. This isn't just like, I mean, not to, you kind of have to talk about it compared to the U.S. January 6th. I mean, this is like, I'm talking to military officials. There's a plan. We're going to try to seize, certain sites and refuse the election results here. It's beyond just like, oh, I have an inkling or a desire for this to happen. These are people who are engaged in the actual groundwork of planning out how to effectively do this.
Yeah. Exactly.
And they, some of them were stupid and kept fucking notes and deleting shit, but this was a genuine attempt.
You just froze up, but I understand the sense of what you said. I think it's my side, my computer. So, but that's why I'm not laughing as much, because it looks like you said something funny about how stupid they were. But they had a written plan on all the steps that they were going to take. And that included a group of military special forces, which they labeled Operation Green and Yellow Fist. And their role was to assassinate Lula, assassinate Vice President Geraldo Alckmin, and assassinate Alexandre de Moraes. This is all written down. They're documented meetings between Bolsonaro and his officials and people representing this group of special forces. And it's been proven that they were surveilling Lula and Alexandre de Moraes and Geraldo Alckmin. And there's actual intercepted WhatsApp conversations in which they're saying, we know where he is. Do you want us to take him out? About Alexandre Moraes. And someone tells them, no, hold back, stand back. And so this is all documented. It's not a case of like one plea bargain testimony or something like that. They have 70 terabytes of evidence, including all of the chat conversations and emails and all this stuff. And so on January 8th, it as laid out in the plan for the coup, the plan was to create confusion in the capital and force Lula to declare a state of siege. So even though the army general, the head of the army wasn't going along, there were lower level officers who commanded bases and things like that who were going along with it, including three generals who were just sentenced. But
And Brian, I just want to remind some folks of this, and you can add some light here. Is that one of the things that was kind of shocking about the Bolsonaro administration was that he kind of brought the military into the government in a way that kind of broke with Brazilian political norms, right?
exactly. Like it's the first time since the dictatorship that, for example, the justice minister was a member of the army, the head of intelligence. Well, there's a department called the Cabinet of Institutional Security, which oversees 16 government secretariats, including intelligence, ABIN, which is the equivalent of Brazil's CIA. And that was General Heleno, the same guy who was taking written notes, writing down, he's got a written notebook planning out all those things, not very cloak and dagger. But so then on January 8th, the idea was to pressure Lula to declare a state of siege. What that does is it turns the security of national security over to the military. And at that point, they were going to arrest Lula, Vice President Alckmin, and several Supreme Court justices, and they were going to declare that the elections were null and void and that they were going to rule the country until new elections could be scheduled. This is what they said in 1964 during the U.S.-backed military coup. We're going to take control of the country until elections can be scheduled. And they finally took place in 1989. The coup was in 1964. So there was a full-blown coup. And on that day, different from January 6th in Washington, in addition to the riots and breaking into buildings and everything with police opening the doors for them, there were 17 high-tension towers sabotaged across the country, causing blackouts in different places. And then in the lead up to that day, a man who had been camped out in one of these protest camps in front of the army base in Brasilia was caught trying to drive a gasoline truck with a bomb attached to it into the airport to try and set it off on Christmas Eve. There was a mob that attacked the federal police headquarters with Molotov cocktails and burned cars and buses in front of the federal police headquarters. And the day that Lula and his wife came for his certification that would enable him to take office, which is a ceremony they have called the diploma ceremony in Brazil. On that day, they attacked his hotel and they were throwing Molotov cocktails at his hotel and stuff. So it was a different level of coup attempt than what you had with Trump in January 6th, which is why it bothers me to see the media making this false equivalency, because then some people might think, oh, it was just a bunch of people high on meth protesting or something, whatever it was in the US, it was a little more complicated than that. And since Brazil,
I think this is really important.
Go ahead.
I really want to highlight this because I think this is a really important point to make as abundantly clear as possible. Is that, I mean, really what this was a full-on coup attempt. So you could talk about how effective or not it was. Thank God it wasn't effective, frankly. But the idea, if you break the law and you do it in a clumsy way, that doesn't mean that you're, immune from prosecution over it, right?
Yeah, imagine if the U.S. just said, well, it's only attempted murder, so anyone who's been tried for attempted murder can just go home because they didn't actually do it. It's just freedom of speech. You could talk about your plans to murder somebody and buy a weapon and, shoot at them and miss them. And then it's not attempted murder because freedom of speech. That's basically what some people are saying about this, the sentence against Bolsonaro. But
let's get this up to the sentence. Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So it was 5 crimes. Attempting a coup d'etat. It's just called, in Brazilian law, it's called coup d'etat. It doesn't matter if it's an attempt, if it's successful or not. In fact, if it's successful, then nobody ever goes on trial. So obviously, coup d'etat is a law, damage to property or inciting damage to property, like a kind of a law equivalent to racketeering, which is forming a criminal organized crime group. Damage to historic monuments, and attempting a rupture from the democratic rule of law. Those are the different crimes that they were convicted of. And they range from 2 years for Mauro Cid the guy who doesn't know that you have to delete your trash folder, return state evidence. He's got 2 years of house arrest, ranging up to 27 years and 3 months for Bolsonaro. I think the second smallest penalty is like 16 years for the former intelligence chief, Alexandre Ramagan, because he resigned from the federal government like 6 months before the coup. So they said that he wasn't involved in all of the stuff that the other people were, because he, left early.
Mm. Well, I mean, well, let's get into, before we kind of talk about the kind of broader reaction to it. I mean, this is something that's most likely is going to be appealed, and there'll be kind of additional processes. Is that something that you're kind of expecting to kind of just play out, while they exhaust their options? Is this like a kind of final moment here, or do you think that there's more to come?
This is a final moment. They had 5 working days from the day the ruling was issued, which was last Thursday, which means they have until tomorrow at the end of the day, if I'm counting correctly. No, maybe Thursday at the end of the day, to submit 2 types of very minor appeals. The first kind of appeal is called a motion for clarification. And all that this does is allows them to alter sentences and alter fines if they can prove that a mistake was made between the arguments of the 5 justices and the final ruling. Like if the math doesn't add up, because each of the 5 crimes has a different prison sentence. So if someone calculated 5 years and 7 years and 3 years and 4 years, whatever, and the final number's wrong, then you file a motion for clarification and correct it. It doesn't have much power above and beyond that. The second type of appeal is called a motion for review. And the most that could do would be to push the trial up to the full plenary body of the Supreme Court, which has 11 members. However, for that to happen, precedent and law, specifies that you need at least 2 dissenting opinions in the ruling by the first Supreme Court panel, and there was only 1. So that's probably not going to happen. So once those appeals are filed on Thursday, the court has a period of up to 60 days to respond to them and issue the terms and conditions of the arrests. And that's it. So it looks like Bolsonaro is going to be in jail. And in the last couple high-profile cases, that turnaround time was much lower, more like 15 days instead of 60. So anywhere from between a few weeks from now and 60 days from now, it looks like 62 days from now, maybe. It looks like Bolsonaro is going to be in jail. Wow. And his sentence calls for 8 years behind bars before he can get any kind of parole or house arrest transfer.
Wow. Well, I mean, obviously a big moment for Brazil. Personally, I know for myself and Matt, it feels fairly big. I mean, we've been following this story since Lava Jato, and I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit because, I can hear folks, I've seen folks, say things along the lines of people were upset when Lula was being kind of persecuted by the Brazilian justice system. What makes this different, Brian?
Yeah, it's 2 different cases. That's what makes it different. The only evidence they had against Lula was 1 coerced plea bargain testimony. And remember what the charges were for him, right? The charges were that after he had left political office, years after he had left political office, he had received a free reforms and an upgrade on an apartment that he had purchased, that his wife had purchased, in exchange for some kind of very vaguely defined influence peddling since he wasn't in office anymore. So first of all, he was a private citizen when the alleged crime took place. That alone should have been enough to not enable it to go to court. Secondly, they could never prove that he owned the apartment. In fact, the proof came out that it was owned by somebody, by the construction company still that built the building. There was never a moment when he or his wife had owned that apartment. Third, the MTST broke into the apartment after he was arrested and filmed and streamed everything. And none of the reforms that the prosecutors claimed took place. They said an elevator had been installed because it was a 3-floor apartment in a kind of crappy building. There's no elevator in there. There was no nice furniture in there or anything. Like, none of the reforms, they prevented the journalists from entering the apartment for a reason during the whole trial, because none of the reforms they claimed it happened would happen. Finally, it was illegally forum shopped to a district where no crimes that he was accused of had taken place, in Curitiba, just because it was this U.S. asset named Sergio Moro, who had been working closely with the Justice Department. They lied in order to justify transferring the case out of the state of São Paulo to the state of Curitiba. They claimed that this apartment deal was tied up in this money laundering scheme involving Petrobras, State Petroleum Company. 3 days after the case was transferred, they removed that charge. Nevertheless, the Guardian's Dom Phillips spent 2 years lying that was still something that Lula had been accused of, that was part of the charges against him, and other newspapers as well. The Guardian wasn't just Dom Phillips. Anyone who wrote about it for the Guardian during that period, the article had to include the lie that Lula had, was being accused of involvement in a money laundering scheme. Right. So first of all, the crime itself was frivolous.
So, I mean, if I'm hearing you right, though, Brian, so basically, the argument is like, hey, if you're saying that this was politically motivated, can you make the same arguments about this Bolsonaro case as folks like you and others made about the Lula case, showing that it was spurious, that there was all of these kind of like false allegations and corruption. There's a kind of a responsibility on somebody saying that, oh, Bolsonaro is going to prison. It's just like the Lula case. Well, can you poke holes in the case? Can you expose those kind of things? Like, that is a challenge that I would throw down at somebody, right?
Yeah, you froze up a little bit, but I think I get the gist of it. I think my computer's
just so you know, it's all good. We'll get the whole thing, so don't worry about that.
All right, excellent. So, you could make the argument that because Lula's case was politically motivated, Bolsonaro's case is also politically motivated. You could make that argument, right? We know that the U.S. Department of Justice was involved in the Lava Jato. That's a fact. That's a matter of established fact, which seems to suggest it was politically motivated. We don't see any involvement or proof yet of any foreign government involved in this case against Bolsonaro. So there's a different element regarding foreign interests in the current case. But you could make that argument. The issue is just, what's the proof, though? And remember that 3 of the 5 justices, right, who ruled on this case also ruled to put Lula in jail. And 2 of them, because Alexandre de Moraes came in 2017, the 2 of them that were there longer also voted to impeach Dilma Rousseff, right? So the only evidence, the main evidence of them being involved in politicized cases and stuff is against the Workers' Party, not in favor of the Workers' Party, even though they were appointed. 2 of the justices, of the 3 who voted to imprison Lula, 2 had been appointed by the PT, but the PT always used strictly technical criteria to appoint Supreme Court justices until this time around, after Bolsonaro tried to stack the court with far right-wing ideologues. Then he put 2 allies in. But the old-time judges who voted to imprison him, they weren't allies. They weren't connected to the Workers' Party or anything. And then I guess another factor against this, it's all just politicized, is to remember that the PT opposed Alexandre de Moraes' nomination to the Supreme Court, whereas all of the Bolsonaro-allied Congress people and senators who are in office, who are now trying to fight to get Bolsonaro out of jail somehow, they all approved his. Because the Supreme Court justice goes to a vote by Congress and the Senate. The Senate approved all the conservatives have approved his nomination, and he's not a leftist of any kind. There's one guy on that court who you could say is a leftist, and that's former Maranhão governor Flávio Dino. He was the Communist Party governor of Maranhão. The rest, even Cristiano Zanin, Lula's other appointee, he's a social conservative. He's voted against abortion rights and marijuana legalization since he's come into office. He's pissing a lot of people off at Lula for nominating him.
Well, I mean, in the last few minutes that we have here, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit then, and talk about the reaction. I mean, Bolsonaro lost convincingly that election. That's why he tried to steal it. But there is still a segment of like the Brazilian population that supported him and that far right vision. I mean, what has the reaction been from the right so far? Have they kind of pushed themselves, try to create distance between them and Bolsonaro? What is the case here?
Okay, well, 43% of the population thinks that Bolsonaro has been unjustly convicted. These are his hardcore fans, and these are the people who are constantly bombarded with the exact same kinds of bot messaging campaigns that you see in England going on right now on immigration. Same tactics, same accounts with in Brazil would be like a Brazilian flag with like 30 followers. In England, it's an English flag. In the U.S., it's a U.S. flag. Or
an Israeli flag.
Well, you see in Brazil too, the Brazil and the Israeli flag. They're using them both together, and now the U.S. flag too. But it's just the exact same algorithm manipulation by these fucking far right billionaires who are trying to take over the world. Favoring these kind of far right wing voices, pretending that there's a freedom of speech issue at stake, pretending that their platforms are a democratic commons where everyone has freedom of speech, that algorithm manipulation doesn't affect freedom of speech, which we know it does. They bury all of the they leave a few token left accounts popular to try and pretend that they're platforms for freedom of speech, but they bury most of them. I mean, you look at a respectable news organization, observatory of the media, like Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, they never get more than 1 or 2 likes for their articles on X. You know that they're shadow banned or it's manipulated somehow. And so those people who fall for all of that stuff, who believe all the memes and everything, they're brainwashed, and they're complaining. And they had a protest the week before the trial that New York Times pretended was this really massive protest that was only a quarter of the size of Bolsonaro's rally on the same street in Sao Paulo in February. It was like 42,000 people. That's pretty big, but it's not mega big. It's not like color revolution size or anything. Bolsonaro brought 220,000 to the same street in February. So 6 months ago, the percentage of his supporters was more like 47, 48%. It's dropping down. 2 weeks ago, 2 parties left the government coalition to join with Bolsonaro's Liberal Party, saying that they were going to try and push for an amnesty law, right? The news this week is that they're backing down from that. The center-right parties are backing down from amnesty. So it's bizarre to see a New York Times article come out yesterday talking about amnesty for the first time when it's been in the Brazilian news all year. But that looks like it's losing steam right now, right? It looks like...
So is there a movement that you think might be able to pick up the mantle? Maybe not successfully enough to win the presidency, but, will Bolsonaro, will Bolsonaro's politics outlive his freedom?
Definitely. And the guy who's going to pick up the mantle is most likely going to be São Paulo Governor Tarcísio de Freitas, allegedly connected to the Rio's right-wing paramilitary militias. Never lived in São Paulo before he became governor. He was like Bolsonaro's number 2. And since he's taken office, police killings have gone up by 61%. Rapes have gone up to record high, mostly of children under the age of 14. Femicide has gone up significantly. the murder rate's gone down 3%, but the national rate has gone down 6%. And it's all because of this like tough on crime, war on crime shit. The people sitting in, out in the country somewhere, out in the middle class suburbs get terrified thinking about crime and want to vote for the guy who declares war on crime, although his actions are increasing crime. But he's the guy.
Yeah.
And if the elections were held tomorrow, he'd make it to the second round, and he'd be like 5%, 6% below Lula. But remember, Lula was up by 5% before the final election and only won by 1%. Because the far right has tactics to manipulate social media to create this surge in the last week before the elections.
Mm-hmm. No. I mean, I think it's definitely something that we'll want to be watching closely. And I think we're running a little low on time, and I think we'll just have to have you back on sometime soon to maybe talk more broadly about Brazil and Lula. But since this is about Bolsonaro, this kind of nebulous figure that we've been talking about for a long time, I mean, I just want to give you the opportunity to kind of, give us your thoughts on Bolsonaro. I mean, this is somebody who's had a large effect on Brazil, a large effect on global politics even. And I was just hoping that maybe you could leave us with your categorization of what the Bolsonaro period has been like for Brazil and the globe.
Well, I'll just say the following. I'll quote a song by Raul Seixas, who is a great Brazilian rock artist whose lyricist was Paulo Coelho, the mystical author who lives in Switzerland in the 70s. He had a song called The Fly in the Soup. And one of the lines is, if you kill me, another one will take my place. And that's what's happening. This is like an international virus, this far-right social media, tech fascist brainwashing experiment that's going on. And Bolsonaro is irrelevant because someone else will take his place, even though he's in jail. That's my opinion. Now, will he be able to pull it off in next year's elections? I don't know. But I think these people, until countries start realizing what a threat social media companies can be to their democracy, this is going to keep happening everywhere. Everywhere that doesn't regulate its social media companies is up for this kind of, I would call kind of like a fascist virus spreading among its citizens.
Well, Brian, you're probably one of the best people for people to follow to keep up with what's happening in Brazil. How can folks keep up with your work?
You're freezing again, but I will just say thanks for having me on. And I think, like I said, people are stealing our wires, our internet cables out in our neighborhoods.
Brian, how can people keep up with your work? Where can they follow you?
I'd appreciate it if everyone could check out my Substack, which is called D-Lincoln Brazil, with a hyphen, D-Lincoln Brazil. And on Twitter, Brian Mir, Brian at Telesur, Brian M at Telesur, I guess, English. I don't remember. But I'm on there. You can find me. You can find me on there easily.
He's easy to find. We'll have all the links below.
That's about it for now. My Telesur reporting on the news program from the South. Those are the three things I do mostly. A lot of my articles appear in Counterpunch, and I write for Fair sometimes also.
Okay, we'll have links below for all of that. Brian, really always great speaking with you.